Hi there, we're from JustGiving, which is a social giving platform, and we've been around for 13 years. We've got 1.5 million lines of code. We've just passed 10 million registered users.
So the sort of state of the world for us at the moment, probably like a lot of other civilizations, we have a massive monolith, and that comes out of good practices that were around for the last 10 or so years, but the world's moving on. It causes us a lot of issues around deployment, testing, even scaling it is kind of really simplistic. So that's kind of was definitely the state of the world perhaps a year ago, but we're definitely trying to sort of change where we're at.
When we started there in November last year, our CTO had a term for it called continual rollback, which isn't the ideal place when you're trying to do continual deployment. So I'm sure, like a lot of you with a web presence, we've got very similar traffic shapes every day. You'll know this, you can see the patterns. At the weekend we've got a slightly different pattern. Over the year it oscillates slightly, but generally a Monday looks like a Monday and a Tuesday looks like a Tuesday.
But we definitely suffer from really spiky traffic. And this is something that's kind of happened much more in the last 12 to 18 months. The sort of presence of Twitter and Facebook driving traffic and the more social awareness means that we kind of get really unpredictable loads that we have no idea when they're going to hit. Something as simple as Stephen Fry tweeting about a particular fundraiser just means bang, we get hit while we're not looking. And also disasters can kind of obviously happen unpredictably, but that generates quite a lot of traffic for us in a very short space of time. And then throw in something being mentioned on the news. Again, we just get hit with this traffic out of nowhere, pretty much like a tidal wave of traffic.
So this is how we used to deal with it. We used to phone up the data center and tell them we need about another 10 boxes, please. And 2 months later, they'd be plugged in, they'd be installed, and they'd be ready to roll. We've been changing that drastically. And what we're looking at now, as we're moving on to Amazon specifically, putting all of our services onto the EC2 platform for the compute, is we're cutting up the monolith and turning it into microservices. I think we're on about 30 now, something like that. And each EC2 instance has its own microservice running on it. If that was physical, we'd be looking at over 100 physical boxes we would have had to have bought in the last 2.5 months, which is just impossible.
So I guess one of the kind of campaigns or fundraising pages that kind of really hit us quite hard from a technical perspective was the case of Stephen Sutton, which is a bit of a sad story about a teenager who was raising money for the Teenage Cancer Trust, and sadly he died. But during that period of time, he went viral massively, and pretty much it came out of nowhere. So it kind of hit Facebook and Twitter. We got huge amounts of traffic in minutes. And then that traffic just kept on growing and growing and growing. And we were still under the old scaling model, so it was literally, we were just phoning up every few minutes and going, throw more servers at it, to a point where actually our hosting provider kind of went, that's all we've got. So we were actually kind of taking boxes out of our dev and staging environments just to kind of give it more power. Just to give you some idea, we had somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million donations to his page sort of during the sort of 48, 36 hours. And you could sit on the, look at the homepage and just push the refresh button and the numbers were just bouncing up. And the thing for us is that charities kind of rely on us to be available. There's a sort of implicit assumption that we will just work. And then on top of that, as an organization, we kind of have a public presence and a fairly large public presence. So that's kind of really important for us to kind of stay up as well. I mean, if in a situation where something's getting huge amounts of profile that we go down, then it's a disproportional negative impact on our image. And then kind of on a more personal level, there's that kind of pride of, having a website that's always available, and you know, I mean, that's very important for me, as much as it is for the business.
Yeah, just to put some numbers behind that, our daily average is about 2,000 concurrent users. At the peak of the viral campaign with Stephen Sutton, it was about 16,000 concurrent users, so 8 times bigger than where we are. And so this is where we've got to now, where at the press of a button, we're trying to be very honest with ourselves, and we're not cheating with anything. We're trying to do everything in code and do it repeatably. So at the moment, as far as we've been 2.5 months on this journey, 3 months now, we're scaling manually, but it's a button press. So we've brought the time down from two months to get some resources down to 5 minutes, but we're still manual. Like I say, we're on the start of a long journey here.
So again, I guess one of the symptoms of a monolithic architecture is realizing the various single points of failure we have. So kind of as we are transitioning stuff to AWS, it's really a good opportunity for us to kind of, you know, pull those out. But I guess another thing I've realized from using AWS is that actually it sort of forces you to actually look at your single points of failure. If you want to make things highly available, which is kind of like the mantra we're working towards, and you run along an assumption that an AWS instance could disappear at any moment, then you start needing to think, well, hey, at a minimum, we need 2 of everything. And then, you know, you want to add a bit more redundancy on top of that. And so it's actually a really positive way of ensuring that you pull out single points of failure. At some point in the future, I don't know if you've heard of a thing called Chaos Monkey. It was created by Netflix, where actually you run some code and it randomly turns off stuff for you. Our aspiration in the not too distant future is to turn that on, which seems really counterintuitive, but as a mechanism for kind of proving your infrastructure is highly available, it's actually quite powerful. Although if you hear we go down at some point, then maybe that might have been a bit too powerful. Yeah. The other thing as well about removing single points of failure and thinking much more about high availability is the impact it has on disaster recovery. So we have some thoughts around being a much more global presence, and therefore, as we kind of scale out and make our stuff more highly available, the amount of things we need to consider as this is a disaster recovery, put it in somewhere extra special somewhere else, the scope of that gets reduced quite dramatically, because actually if you lose parts of your system, it should just carry on. So there's a lot of power in kind of going through this process of making things highly available, and therefore not having to worry so much about parts of your estate from a DR perspective.
As an anecdotal version of that, we had a SAN with all of our images, 5 million images stored on it, and a new ops guy started and opened it in Windows Explorer and brought our whole site offline while it tried to index that folder. So this is an example of what we're kind of doing now, and one of the first things we took out of the monolith and deployed as its own microservice in AWS. And this is an immutable image server. Basically, it's backboned by S3 for its reliability and availability. And on the front of it, there's varnished caches for performance, and once something's in that cache, it stays there forever. This unit of work is deployable all around the world, so we can take it to different regions for the performance optimizations and use Route 53 for geo DNS routing.
Cool. And that's pretty much us. Thank you very much.